The case in Washington, D.C., the election interference case brought by Jack Smith, that he had to, again, issue and refile a superseding indictment after that Supreme Court case granting a lot of immunity to President Trump. So people were kind of watching to see how would he change it. Of course, a couple of the changes he made were really just kind of ridiculous. Like instead of calling him President Trump, they referred to him in this case now as candidate Trump to try and, again, distract from the fact that he was president at the time they are trying to bring these acts occurred. Of course, there were some charges they had to drop completely, but if you actually look at the charges they brought, two of which in a different Supreme Court case that we filed in were tossed out by the Supreme Court as charges that would not be relevant in these cases, even to those who entered the Capitol illegally on January 6th, remain in this case. And then, of course, they're explaining today kind of a timeline. The judge says she will totally, this is Judge Chutkan in D.C., is trying to totally ignore the election. But here's the issue. There's issues within this because, for instance, the discussions with Vice President Pence, is that part of his official, job as president? Seems like it, because when you talk to your vice president and your president, even if you disagree with each other, that would appear to be official actions. Well, who gets to decide if that's official or not, and thus could be used in court against President Trump or is covered by immunity? Well, of course, President Trump's attorneys asserted, this was made pretty clear by the Supreme Court, that would be covered already, that he'd be immune from that. You have to toss that communication out. Judge Chutkan said the Supreme Court says she gets to make the decision on whether or not there's immunity there. So that issue alone is ripe for appeal to go to the D.C. Court of Appeals, then ultimately, likely, I see another trip potentially to the U.S. Supreme Court. So what does it mean for the timeline? Well, it's interesting, Will, because she said, I don't care about the elections. I'm not considering the elections at all. President Trump, by the way, he pled not guilty to all of the charges, all of the counts.
There aren't cameras in the federal courthouse, so these are quotes that we're getting from journalists that are inside there for these proceedings today. But Judge Chutkan said this court is not concerned with the electoral schedule. That is not something I'm going to consider. I'm definitely not getting dragged into the election. So the fact that we already brought up that it appears Jack Smith was violating Department of Justice regulations and guidance already with bringing the superseding indictment at the time he did, now we know that the judge in this case is not going to even consider that in her scheduling. Once again, it appears more election interference from the DOJ, and this is the day after we see them have the Attorney General parade out there complaining about what? Russian interference in the election.
In a separate enforcement action, the Justice Department is seizing 32 internet domains that the Russian government and the Russian-sponsored actors have used to engage in a covert campaign to interfere and influence the outcome of our country's elections. As alleged in our court filings, President Vladimir Putin's inner circle, including Sergei Kirillenko, directed Russian public relations companies to promote disinformation and state-sponsored narratives as part of a program to influence the 2024 U.S. presidential election. An internal planning document created by the Kremlin states that as a goal of the campaign is securing Russia's preferred outcome in the election.
The DOJ, is trying to politicize their role as much as possible. So I think with moving forward with the superseding indictment as quickly as they could, even though the Supreme Court slapped them down so hard, to try and get back into court like they did today, get the not guilty plea again from President Trump on this superseding indictment. They've already gotten that once on the initial indictment and rewriting it. And then the Merrick Garland coming out with the Russia again and having, the Russian disinformation coming through, I guess, websites, and they're supposed to look real, but they aren't real, and they're trying to mislead American voters. It's the exact same playbook. They are restarting it once again.
It's so ironic to me that they keep pushing this Russia narrative. They've been pushing it since 2016. Well, probably before that, when the dossiers were written up and paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign. But what you're seeing is Merrick Garland, who is not a voice of confidence when you see him out there talking about this Russian interference. But I think the one thing that they keep missing is they just so badly want to believe that Russia wants Trump to win that they can't realize that what Russia really wants is a weakened United States and a destabilized United States so that they can continue to do whatever they want around the world. And what has happened in the Obama administration, they moved into Crimea, the Russians. Why? Because of the status of the United States on the world stage. During the Trump years, they held back on their adventurism. What do? As soon as Joe Biden goes into office, they invade Ukraine and they start a land war in Europe based off of what? There's no resistance from the United States. Yes, we are spending billions and billions of taxpayer dollars to prolong it by propping up Ukraine.
Just enough propping up
to keep it going.
Without anybody winning. And winning in this case for Ukraine, I think, would just be Russia withdrawing from some parts of the territory. The Merrick Garland coming out with the Russia again and having Russian disinformation coming through, I guess, websites, and they're supposed to look real, but they aren't real, and they're trying to mislead American voters. It's the exact same playbook. They are restarting it once again.
That's right. And in this case, as we mentioned earlier, Judge Chutkan is the one who's going to have to be the arbiter of some of these immunity issues. We know that the Supreme Court gave very strong guidelines about what many of those are. Many of them outright. They were like, if it was a conversation with someone that is in this department in the executive branch, that's immune. But there are some of the other issues that she's going to have to parse out. And the attorney here for President Trump, John Lauro, he's actually asking for an evidentiary hearing because Judge Chutkan said immunity needs to be dealt with as early as possible. And he wants a full and robust record on that early. So that's what people refer to almost as like the mini trial. It's where the prosecution has to bring forward and kind of present their evidence to the judge so that she can make decisions on what's allowed and what's not allowed. So that is something, though, that we'll find out when she sets this schedule, maybe even later today, but whether or not that's something that could happen before the election. If there's an evidentiary hearing where Jack Smith has to go in there and kind of lay everything out on the table, and the judge then needs to parse out what things are allowed and not allowed based off the immunity ruling of the Supreme Court, we could see something like that if the judge in this case, is wanting an accelerated timeline to try to get this going because she opened the court this hearing today with almost a joke of, oh, I haven't seen you guys in a while. You're looking good. Because it's been nearly a year because of the Supreme Court's action on this case that put everything on hold since really late last year. So even that, the judge was kind of making a joke to try to crack the ice, break the ice a little bit as they came back into court for the first time in many, many months.